This is all really about what I spent my master's doing. It was about developing the idea of curating research, thinking deeply about the form and presentation of research outputs and activities. The way I decided to approach this was to use the skill set of the curator to inform a more progressive style of research communication. And just to give you some context, it's helpful to understand my kind of professional background. So you'll probably all know me as the technician person there, kind of supporting academics, video resources and so on at university. I also do these two other things. An artist making photographs, painting, do lots of things with reappropriation as well, which is taking something from one purpose and kind of shifting it to something else. Commissions and so on, and then curatorial stuff, which what I've spent my time doing in the masters, and do that on a kind of a consultancy thing. So you'll see these roles starting to unify and starting to inform each other as I kind of go through. You know, anyone who's around children a lot will be able to testify that they can offer up remarkably sincere reactions to things that they see, perhaps because they're yet to undergo the kind of social conditioning which makes us go, what's going to happen now if I say that? And so in this book, they get the group of kids get asked, what does a contemporary artist do? So this is what they said when they were asked to start with. Then they went back to the children. This is in kind of an art gallery setting. And then they showed them lots of work that contemporary artists do and then re-asked them the question again. And so this time they came back with that, which is interesting, right? That's an interesting. It's not just they paint pictures, they do this, they do that. They notice things. I started to think about what is it that I've noticed in those roles that has informed this idea of curating research. So this is what I'm going to talk about in terms of kind of these 5 key areas. When I started off, I thought, right, dictionary definition of research, what is that going to be? So I went to the OECD and something along those lines. I, however, would probably argue that research output which exclusively takes the form of things like journal articles, books and papers, doesn't necessarily create favourable conditions for that to happen, especially in a diverse contemporary society. I think texts do a great job of being kind of a mothership or a Bible to underpin research, but potentially not such a good job of catching the eye, seducing a consumer, or getting information efficiently into the public consciousness. These statements aren't necessarily supposed to be anti-book, because books and journals are rightly part of the system and they're here to stay, but they are one thing in a huge spectrum of potential outputs. So I'm trying to explore what that may look like in terms of the way research is communicated. There are incentives included in assessment frameworks like the REF, which try and kind of quantify or measure impact based on what people are making. And you can see the percentages there of what the REF 2021 will be in terms of those things. And that's the kind of definition of what impact is there at the bottom, that kind of effect or change beyond academia. And here we can see that there's a lot riding on what we make and the impact it has, you know, what those outputs are. And actually this kind of responsibility for making output and making things does tend to kind of rest in the hands of the academic themselves, with no kind of designers or curators employed by universities or research institutions. But luckily for us, public relations experts, the manufacturing economy and the art world have been working on all this stuff for quite a long time. And especially when you introduce profit into the equation, those sort of industries don't waste their time on anything inefficient or ineffective. So you get this kind of big picture about the types of outputs that are used in the world. So bearing this in mind, these are kind of my research questions. How can research enter the public consciousness in an age when we have more ways to share ideas than we ever have done before? And what form could they take? What form do those research outputs and activities take? And then just kind of a question more to the kind of academics really would be, what does the world start to look like if your research has the reach and the impact of things like your favourite brands? What's changing? What does that look like? The kind of story of research communication could begin with scientists like Michael Faraday, who realised that their cutting-edge research was to reach its potential and change the world. It had to be seen. There are numerous examples of times when making research visible to a bigger audience benefited innovation in other areas also. And I could go into a bunch of examples, but not today perhaps. So this is him at the Royal Institution giving the first Christmas lecture, which still happens today. Here we can see a kind of captive audience, eager to learn, but also be entertained. I think that's why they go into these things, right? But today we have these kind of global mobile publics with unlimited access to multiple forms of entertainment and knowledge. So how does one go about kind of engaging with that audience, not just potentially an academic one? And that is where the curator comes in. Until very recently, it's probably likely that you've heard the word curator used in the context of art galleries, museums, as someone who cares for and displays objects. But today, it seems to be popping up in all sorts of other places as well. You probably heard someone talk about on the radio, or we curated a playlist, or we curated a fashion show, or we curated, lots of different things. It's popping up. And we could speculate why. I think maybe it might bring some artistic swagger or a bit of academic glamour to roles that are slightly kind of less creative, perhaps, who knows. But a contemporary definition, kind of what I worked here, is here at the top. This may be more these days activities concerned with the mediation and ultimately presentation of an idea to an audience. So that's why I'm kind of interested in that and how you can apply that to research communication. I was lucky to interview Erica Lair over in Montreal last year. As a kind of entry point to this way of thinking, her and Shelley Ruth Butler wrote this book. It was kind of a challenge to academics to imagine exhibitions as a way to channel this type of research communication critique. So if you, in an ideal world, you had an exhibition space, you as a researcher, how are you going to kind of present that to an audience? So it'd also be fair to say that this idea of curating research is my curatorial dream, kind of influenced by Erica, which looks to contribute to the discourse surrounding things like impact, public engagement, the ref, interdisciplinarity, in terms of what gets made and how it gets shown. And that kind of leads us on to the senses. These are obviously the receptors through which we experience and perceive the world, judge and engage with it. And I think as human beings as well, we're influenced by what we experience through these senses and turn them into emotions and actions. So whatever we see, smell, hear, experience goes directly to inform what we do. And knowing this does not give us an excuse to bombard the senses. You hear lots of people talking about kind of burnout on what they're seeing every day. I'm having all this stuff chucked at me. But Professor David Howells, also in Montreal, says that actually considering the senses lets you consider them more carefully. It's not about bombarding. It's more about what senses am I going to go for, and how am I going to work that out to have the kind of biggest impact on my audience. Now, this is a kind of case in point regarding the senses in human perception. Has anyone seen the show Cosmos on Netflix? It's the one that Carl Sagan started in the 70s. Neil deGrasse Tyson now presents it. If pollutant gases were bright purple, for example, would that change the speed to which people would try and put steps in place to clean up pollution, or in terms of climate change and so on? He's kind of suggesting yes, if there was kind of bright purple kind of gas everywhere, people would be going, huh? But it's invisible, so we don't see it, and limited action is taken. So in order to curate research using the senses, I look to the cultural landscape for examples of knowledge transfer. Every time I saw kind of knowledge being transferred from one place to another through anything apart from books and journals and so on, because that area is kind of taken care of. So this cultural landscape that I'm referring to is the landscape in which we live. It includes basically anything you can think of, all spaces and things in society, public and private, that form our experiences. So I tried to examine this landscape empirically by traveling across several countries and looking out for when I'm being told something. So a quick, simple example might be, I'm walking down the street and there's a billboard and it tells me a cheeseburger at a place is 99p. So in that instance, I would write down billboard. I'm not interested that cheeseburgers are 99p, but I'm interested that a billboard has given me information. It's told me something that I didn't know before. So what I'm doing is kind of searching for the specific vehicles that are used by any sector whatsoever to communicate something with an audience. I only record the vehicle, not what it's saying, like I was just saying there, and collated these into an outputs list, if you will. So this is what I'm just going to show you now, with some nice piano music over the top of it for you to also enjoy. And it's probably, can you spot anything in there that you think, conceptually, that might do something for my research? How does it, in the way I present it? Okay, so there's lots on there that won't apply in any way, shape or form, but there's, with the idea of kind of making outputs, you know, how does one make an output then if there's all this possibility? And what it would really be is a collaboration between experts in research, an academic, and experts in communication, the curator. So these two people come together, they design something, maybe you sit down and you pick 2 or 3 off that list which kind of conceptually that they're appropriate for the research. They speak to the aims and objectives of the research quite closely. Similar to what the conceptual artist does, they seek the best vehicle for the idea or concept at hand. Likewise, a curator of research would do this as well. And there's a clear refusal there to default to a traditional method, especially if it's going to get made anyway, and a desire to find a kind of shoe that fits for the communication side. It's the communication of research outputs in the cultural landscape through the senses. That's what we're looking at. And then we've got a little equation at the bottom, which it basically tells me what I think an output is. I think the terminology, different places you pick up on it, might mean something slightly different, but that's kind of what I'm thinking of. The information's the research, the vehicle's something else, and together you get an output. I just want to let you see the first few things where I went, I wonder what an output could be. This was the first one. Did anyone see the protest at the Peru beauty pageant? No. So I saw this online somewhere, and this is the first thing that made me question what an output could be. So the women walked up to the front, and at the moment where they would normally read out measurements of themselves, they read out things to do with statistics on violence against women in Peru. But no one knew that was going to happen, so it was all very newsworthy and a shock to lots of people that would happen. But I watched that happen, and I went, if there's an audience of people that are watching beauty pageants, maybe they're the people that need to get told those things, or at least they exist in that world in a non-kind of, in another place. Because the tool speaks somewhat to the same topic, the objectification of women in this instance. So the information is data violence against women. The vehicle is a televised beauty pageant intervention. Now, televised beauty pageant intervention is very hard to come up with in probably the first couple of days that you're talking to an academic about how the research is going to get shown. But I was genuinely quite jealous about that as an output. I thought, wow, okay, that's brilliant. Here's another one, a collaboration between Eliasson and Rosing outside the Place du Panthéon in Paris. The information here is subjects on climate change. These are all ice boulders that have been taken from, I want to say, Greenland, glacial ice, and they put them in outside this public thoroughfare, and people just have to sit and watch it melt. But then there's that, you're walking past it, you go, oh, that's what's happening. I don't see it every day, it's not on my doorstep, but here's a way of kind of bringing that together. Information, climate change. Vehicle, public art. So we're starting to sort of link the two up. This one was done by a great artist called Krzysztof Rodiczko. And this is a projection on the Abraham Lincoln statue in Union Square Park, and he interviewed lots of war veterans about their experiences, and they did quite long interviews, and they took pieces out of the interviews, projected their face and arms onto the statue. So as you're walking through the park, you're listening to the veterans recount the stories that actually happened to them, rather than maybe relying on a media outlet to do the same thing. Information, interviews with veterans, vehicle, projection on the statue. And the last one I'm just going to show is this wonderful comedian. You will notice him from films, John Leguizamo. He did a thing on Netflix a while ago called Latin History for Morons. I don't know if anyone saw it. It's effectively a combination of a lecture and a stand-up comedy special together. So he tracks Latin history throughout, you know, when he sort of Mayan eras right up to the modern day. So just to wrap up, as it's near Christmas, you know, it's very clear from university strategies and visions that research should not have unlimited audience, nor should universities want to attract one type of student. This, if you want to call it research, looks to create favourable conditions for the broad consumption of research in society, and for academic institutions to realise the strategic goals they are set and which they set themselves. So I'm trying to figure all that out and take that in a direction. That's the places where you can look at all that type of stuff that I'm doing. And yeah, thanks for that.